Hi, welcome to the DRH show where I have wide-ranging conversations with fascinating people. We talk about all things psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by a teacher. He's originally from Manchester and now he's relocated to Vietnam to teach English. Conor Kelly, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dennis. How are you?
I'm very good, and it's a pleasure to be on the other side of the table. If you're listening to this, just to give you a bit of a background, Conor Kelly is the host of the Comeback podcast, and a few weeks ago, I was one of his guests, and so we decided to sort of collaborate, and so that's why he ended up on the DRH show. Now, Conor, I already gave a bit of a hint in relation to your background. You're originally from Manchester. I know you relocated to Vietnam to teach English. So if you could just tell us a bit more about your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no problem. So initially, yeah, I am from Manchester. I moved there when I was 2, having been born in the Netherlands. And yeah, grew up there, spent school there most of my childhood. And then when I was 18, I went to Sheffield. I went to Sheffield-Hallam University to study journalism. From a young age, I realized that journalism would probably be something that I would go towards. I enjoyed the reading, the writing, the research, finding out about different fascinating characters. And as a result of that, I thought to do a journalism degree. So I did that when I was at uni. That was Manchester and Sheffield. And 2 years ago now, 29th of July 2019, I coincidentally remember the date, I took the leap and moved to Saigon, Vietnam.
Brilliant. And you told me that you did journalism at uni, and now you're teaching English. Have you always been fascinated with language?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I always found it interesting that the power of language can be so prominent, where you can use it for good or for bad. The two most prominent examples that come to mind are William Shakespeare for good, Adolf Hitler for bad. They both used language in extreme terms to get their message across. And I love the fact that if you can open a book or a poem or an article, you can go on a journey simply through the words that are on the page. So from a young age, I was into reading and writing quite avidly, and that's probably where my fascination with writing lies.
Now, Connor, I've been talking to a lot of people from different backgrounds, but one of the common things that kind of overlaps when it comes to their background is they have a passion about mental health and wellness. So if you could just share to us a bit about your experiences when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, no problem. Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't really familiar with the terms mental health or anything related to that until I went to uni, so until I was 18. From a young age, I used to get quite anxious, quite nervous, and quite pessimistic at several points of my childhood for no particular reason. And I always thought I was just weird. I always thought maybe I should just, to use the cliche phrase, man up, or just, yeah, get along with it. There was no external reason. I had a very idyllic, happy childhood, never bullied, never abused. Everything from the outside was perfect, and still is, really. Just, yeah, for some reason there was always these intrusive thoughts, really, these blockages which happened to come up. And so then when I got to university at 18 and started learning more about it, I started doing some research into anxiety and depression. And coincidentally, I ticked every single box. When you look at, say, the NHS list, I thought, yeah, that definitely is me. So I started getting treatment from it. And it did take me a while. It wasn't a quick fix. I gradually came out to friends and family and said, yeah, I've been struggling a little bit. But I had a habit of, how do I say it, not exaggerating, and not covering up, but only giving certain details. So I'd say, yeah, just struggling a bit with depression, when in reality, it would ruin days on end. So I was leaning into it. But in terms of my own experiences, I think it's been a lifelong thing. And I've been fascinated ever since I found out, really, about 6 years ago, how to combat it, how to get better personally, and why it manifests. Is it a genetic factor? Is it a chemical imbalance? Can family life play a role? Is it your society? There are so many different things, and it generally fascinates me. It's one of the key themes for me in the last 5-6 years. So based on my own experiences, that's what got me down the road of exploring mental health further amongst myself and my peers.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're in a better shape now after, you realize that you're suffering from a mental health condition. But as what you've said, it's probably also down to the fact that right now we're already at the generation where we talk more about mental health, whereas, like compare it to people who were living during the war, as you would say, they just probably just, like man up, when it comes to, when they're experiencing adverse life conditions. But yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that you kind of found a way to manage your mental health. Now another thing that I want to ask you, Conor, is obviously you're originally from Manchester and then you relocated to Vietnam. I would imagine it's sort of a different world living in Vietnam. I remember my time because we kind of like I did it the other way around because I'm originally from the Philippines. I spent a few times. I spent a few time living in Southeast Asian countries, in fact, including Vietnam. But when I first came here into the UK in 2013, it's a bit of adjustment, a process of adjustment. So I was just wondering, Conor, did you experience homesickness the first time you moved to Vietnam, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, there hasn't been an awful lot of homesickness where, of course, from a nostalgic aspect, I do miss family, I miss friends, I miss places that I used to haunt. But however, in terms of homesickness, it hasn't really hit me so bad. I used to be quite a homebird, shall we say, where when I went to Sheffield, I would miss Manchester a lot. But strangely enough, despite the fact that that was an hour train journey and Saigon to Manchester, 16-hour flight, there just hasn't really been that much homesickness. I think that with the whole transition, the adjustment period, I suppose at the time, when I left, I was just about to turn 22. And I realized, yeah, this is probably the time to see something different. I was getting a lot better in terms of my well-being, my mental health, my confidence. So I thought, why not give it a try now? And in the 2 years since, it's been tricky. Of course, with the pandemic, you have lots of time to think. However, I did realize that, and I'm sure the people around me, family and friends would agree, that this is probably the best move I made in terms of my own development, my own maturity, where I don't have to rely on anybody else. I have to be completely self-sufficient. And I think in terms of that, okay, it would be lovely to see family and friends. I was lucky to see my two younger brothers back in December 2019, January 2020, just before Corona. I haven't seen my other family members since, but I think when we do meet up, I think we'll acknowledge that it was for the better, where I went away, did my own thing, and when I come back, they're always here for me. So I'm very lucky in terms of my support network that homesickness hasn't really been an issue.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to hear that you actually enjoyed and you adapted very well in Vietnam. But I was just wondering if you could share to us some interesting culture that you've learned while you are already in Vietnam.
Right. Okay. The culture in Vietnam is very, very different compared to Manchester or the whole of England and anything I'd ever experienced. Where, for example, just a bit of background, I hadn't left Europe before Vietnam. I hadn't gotten a plane longer than 4 hours. I hadn't had a plane with in-flight entertainment. So even that was, a slight change. In terms of the Asian culture, I'm surprised, and Vietnamese culture, I'm surprised at how fast-paced it is. It's very relentless. This can be the traffic, where you have to figure out in the first couple of days that they will keep going. It's not like a stop-start, system that there is in the UK. And also, when you're walking around a shopping centre, everybody's there. Everybody's ready to go. There's that. In terms of their work ethic, it's phenomenal. Often 6 days a week is seen as the minimum in the majority of fields. I know that where I work, the TA teaching assistants or ACs, the Vietnamese teachers, they will always work Saturday. And I think, how do you go at that length, where back in the Western world, we often, advocate for breaks, where here there's not much time off. So it's interesting in that regard. I also see the difference that I found was I left my family at a young age to come here. So I was, yeah, as I said, just about to turn 22. Whilst often I'll meet people here who are in their late 20s or their 30s, and it's still common for them to live with their family, as in the whole family, extended family, uncles, aunties, grandparents, sometimes cousins. And in the UK, that just doesn't seem to be the norm. So those are the two main aspects, I suppose: the relentless nature of the Vietnamese, the family orientated spirit, and yeah, I suppose the main word I'd use to describe Saigon, Vietnam, which is beautiful in many ways, but hectic is probably the word that springs to mind when I discuss this place.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, of course, like what we said earlier, you've been teaching English in Vietnam. So I was just wondering, do you have sort of the same style, teaching style when it comes to teaching, or is it you have a sort of different approach? So I suppose what I'm trying to ask you, Conor, is how is your approach different to other English teachers in Vietnam?
Mm. That is a good question. I was lucky enough when I arrived, we were given a 2 week training induction, which was amazing because I hadn't taught prior, neither had a lot of people in the room. So it was great to feed off each other, get some ideas going, and also see what other teachers do. Because I would, for example, do my lesson and think, is that the way to do it? Whilst I think I've realized there's no right or wrong way to teach. I mean, some teachers will be quite exuberant and bombastic. Some teachers will be quite relaxed. I think my approach borders on the two, and it depends on the topic. Occasionally, I can be quite energetic and a little bit, I say silly. I think they often learn from humor. And initially, I came in with almost the schoolmaster attitude. I had my tie and my top button, and was right. Okay, we're going to learn no matter what. Yeah, I do like to have a laugh with the students. I think if they know you can be silly, then they usually learn better. For example, I think I was demonstrating verbs one time, and one was jump. And as I jumped, I nearly hit my head on the light switch, and they were all howling, laughing. And instead of, I thought briefly about should I tell them off, and I thought, well, if I tell them off, it's a bit harsh. They're only about 7 or 8, so why not laugh along with it? So I think my main style would go towards humor, but I can also instill discipline, which surprised me because in my day-to-day life, I'm not the most strict character. I class myself as reasonably laid back, but when I get into a classroom and they're noisy, I can certainly turn on what's the word? The scary teaching mode, shall we say. So I think the mix between humor and discipline, if you are to get that correct, where they both respect you, I think that's probably the most important thing in the classroom, but also like you and look forward to your lessons, then I think you're on to a very solid winner in creating a positive classroom culture.
Absolutely. And of course, Connor, you predominantly teach children, but do you also expect older learners, like let's say, for instance, professionals in Vietnam?
I would be open to the idea. Based on
Mhm.
the 3 jobs I've had out here, it's always been linked to smaller children, grades 1 to 5. And when I was at a language centre, I taught a teenage class where it was just me. And I did quite like speaking to older children who were a bit more streetwise, of course, due to their age. But I haven't gone down the route of teaching adults just yet. I certainly would be open to in the future, maybe business English, and I feel like it would suit me if we had a similar rapport. But we'll see what happens in the future. Currently, that's not what I'm doing.
Yeah, sounds exciting. And of course, I suppose that the time that you're spending now in Vietnam is sort of an opportunity for you to discover more of your values. So if you could just share to us, what are your core values, Connor?
Yeah, of course, that's a very good question. This took me a while to figure. I felt as if it was almost cliche, which is what are your values? And I always thought, well, I don't know. And then once I got some time to myself, I figured them out and thought, okay, what are 5 things that I could do which are going to make sure I have a good day? For example, if you're struggling with your mental health, I think this can be a great one because I was often unclear whether the day was good or not. I'd think, well, that was good, that was bad. But it would all come together in a mess because I had no definitive guide or system to work towards. So once I figured out values that I hold dearly, I thought, right, okay, if I can tick these boxes off in a day, then it's productive and it's positive and it gives me a blueprint for the future. the 5 that I've come to the conclusion are: 1, to love. And I don't mean this in a cheesy, romantic way. I mean love in terms of an appreciation or a gratitude sense, where whether I read a good book or have a good meal or have a good chat with a loved one, family or friend, that can be the value. Once I realize I've done that in a day, I've done pretty well. Secondly is to laugh. I mentioned the humor side of things with the teaching. I, especially in the last year or so, realized that occasionally I can be a bit too serious. So I thought, why not just goof about, so to speak? It definitely helps the day go by better. And even if it's slightly childish, it does help. So why not just go towards that route? So to laugh is number 2. To learn, I think number 3. I've been very lucky that in Saigon, there are so many different people from so many different backgrounds with so many different influences, cultures, experiences, opinions, which I think, okay, I can take a little bit from everyone here. For example, if I was born in Vietnam or Korea or Thailand or South Africa or Italy, the people I've met, I would probably think more towards this. So why not try to learn something about that culture? And also when I interview guests, I'm able to interview them about a topic that I previously would have had no knowledge about, for example, a bee farm or psychedelics or medicine. And I'm thinking, okay, to learn about this is great. It's always good to expand your mind. For example, I heard somewhere, and somebody involved in psychology, you will know a lot better than I am, that up until the age of 25, 26, your brain hasn't fully developed. Now, I have no idea if this is true. This is just what I've read. And if that's true, then that's great, because I've got just over a year to get to that point, and to learn as much as possible would be great. So love, laugh, learn. Number 4 is to be creative, where I have a lot of thoughts sometimes, for example, and I've definitely noticed a pattern of depression caused to overthinking. So if I was to get that down on a page with a pen and paper, suddenly not only is it cathartic in releasing the things that are holding me back, it's also nice as a creative outlet where I write blogs quite regularly. I've started writing books. I've done my podcasts. This is all helpful in the creative sense because it keeps me guessing. I can get inspiration from anywhere, whether this be music, sport, the people I talk to, conversations drop in. I can always get a takeaway. So I think to be creative is a huge, huge value of mine, which has only taken me 22 years or so to realize this, but I think I need to really make that a core non-negotiable. And the 5th one I found is to move. Now, to move is in many different senses, but I think the 2 that are coming to mind for me are traveling and exercise. Growing up, I was the scrawny kid, really, who was pretty good at running and reasonably good at exercise, but just wouldn't bother, wouldn't have the discipline or motivation. And the last couple of years, it's definitely come back in, and I noticed such a change in my attitude, demeanor, mental and physical health when I do it, in terms of my appearance also. So that's another one. Also the traveling. Sometimes I go away with friends. Sometimes I meet friends there. Sometimes I go solo. Every single time I come away with a slightly different mindset than I did going into it, and that can also help my work. So in summary of your question, to love, to laugh, to learn, to be creative, and to move. Those are probably my top 5 values.
Okay. One thing that strongly resonates with me with what you said, Connor, is traveling. I'm the kind of person who always invests when it comes to traveling. Obviously, that has been kind of restricted now because of the lockdown, but I always make it a point to visit at least one country every year. And just like what you've said, you know what, when you come back from holiday, you know, you take away something from the places that you visit and the people that you met. Now, Connor, you already mentioned what you're doing when it comes to your blog, when it comes to your podcast, Come Back. But the interesting thing about your podcast is that originally you did not really envision it to be a podcast. It started as a blog. So what made you decide to turn it into a blog? To turn it into a podcast from a blog?
Yeah, no problem. Well, it's strange because I used to listen to podcasts regularly, whether this was on the way to the gym, on the bus to work, or sometimes just in my room. I just found it fascinating that you could learn so much from a conversation. And I often realized, I can change my viewpoint if I listen to this particular individual. And it got to 2019 and I was getting a lot better, listened to a lot of podcasts, was writing a little bit. And slowly but surely, I realized eventually I'm going to have to get my work out there. But there was this big fear that putting yourself out there, you're open to exposure, it's not going to be good enough. So many dissuading voices. And eventually I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go for it. So I created a blog where I would just write what I was thinking. I mean, my early blogs, a bit about moving to Vietnam and why I took the leap, a bit about previous experiences with depression. And I'd also write about stuff that I found fun. So this could be music or sport. I'd write about people in the public eye who'd come back from adversity. My main focus was probably the boxer Tyson Fury, if you're familiar. And yeah, that was the initial starting point. Then after a few months of doing that, I wasn't really fulfilled. I think maybe I should do something different. And I'd start interviewing people in blog form via the internet. And this helped me in two ways, because I had a journalism background anyway, so I roughly knew the art of an interview and I was very comfortable writing. And also, it was a new outlook where I could get the interviews done. I was never comfortable in front of a microphone or a camera. And I thought, okay, so just write for now. And once it got to around December, so I'd done it regularly for 3 months, I had a chat with a guy who runs a podcast called the Mind Podcast, a lad called Darren. And on the phone to me, he said, yeah, I've run out of excuses not to do a podcast. And that hit me pretty hard. I thought, I've not got an excuse not to do a podcast here. Would I do a podcast? Yeah, I think I would. What's holding me back? And the only thing that came up was fear. Once I realized, if I just do it, the fear will soon evaporate. I thought, right, okay. So he invited me on his podcast in mid-December, and I was extremely nervous, but I got through it and thought, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Wouldn't it be great if I was to ask the questions? So very simply, it was the turn of the new year. I created it, released it on Anchor. The first one was just me giving a brief introduction. Then I thought, right, okay, I need some guests. And initially I was going to get big studio equipment. I was going to make it perfect, get all the gear. However, I realized I'm not the most technical person. I'm still not. I still struggle with that side of things, and I'm learning it gradually. However, if I wait for that to be perfect, I'd still be waiting now, for example. So this is 7 months after I released it. Whilst if I at least, get the ball rolling and start doing some podcasts, then I'm going to be able to learn the skill of it and do it. And as we currently speak, it's 7 months in, 138 podcasts. And the inspiration, I suppose, to answer your question, and not to backtrack too much, is that to start the podcast, it was just, I think this is going to be a better avenue. You get more of a real connection talking to somebody now like yourself, Dennis, rather than talking to them on the phone and then writing down their thoughts. It's live, it's more authentic. People will be more inclined to listen rather than to read a blog. They'll take more away from it. I'll probably enjoy it more. So I thought, let's just go through this initial block that's an invisible wall in my mind, start a podcast and see where you go. And within 4 or 5 episodes, in fact, if not even sooner, I thought, brilliant, I'm onto something here. This is something that I could really, really enjoy. And I thoroughly enjoy it, I really do. So that's how it all started from the podcast side of things.
Absolutely. What you told me there also resonates with me, because I remember the very first time that I launched the Be Alright show on YouTube. I was also nervous, but I think what it boils down to is that if you started something new, you're kind of like fearful of the criticism from other people. But we have to realize that anything that is new is really messy, and if you just kind of put that aside, the fear of being criticized, then we just be able to manage it, what we're doing, what we wanted to do, just like the blogging and the podcast. And you're really doing a marvelous job, Conor. And I do invite everyone who wants to listen more to the things that you cover, culture, lifestyle, and a bit of mental health, to listen to your podcast. So what I'll do is I'll pop in the link to your podcast on the description notes. So for anyone who wants to learn more about the work that you do, they could listen to your podcast. Now, Conor, you already mentioned some interesting episodes. You mentioned earlier that there's, you have an episode about psychedelic, and you have an episode about mental health and the development of brain. But other than those, are there any interesting episodes that stand out from your memory?
That is a good question. And I occasionally get asked this, what's your favorite episode? And to be honest with you, it's like picking a favorite child. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible. There have been so many. I mean, I'm going to mention some that I was delighted to record because they'd been in my mind for years. For example, my 3 podcasts that really helped me go forward in this journey are London Real, the High Performance Podcast with Jake Comfort and Damien Hughes, and Unfiltered with James O'Brien, who's a British journalist. Now, London Real was the one that really got me. I would listen to that religiously. So many of the guests. They included such incredible figures like Mark Manson, Paul McKenna, Marisa Peer, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Sadhguru. The list is astonishing, and I digested so much of it. And listening to it, I thought, I'd love to have a chat with some of the people who've been on there today. And to this day, I've had 3 of their guests, which 3 of the ones that really stood out to me too, which I was so happy to get recorded. One was a guy called Jeff Thompson, an absolutely extraordinary figure who he delved into when he was 11. He was sexually abused by his martial arts instructor, and as a result of that, turned extremely violent and struggled to cope for 10 to 15 years, if not longer. And what he did to overcome that was he created a fear pyramid, where he created a pyramid and put his fears from bottom to top in terms of how debilitating they were. And he systematically confronted them one by one. For example, the bottom one was spiders, the top one was violence. Now, to deal with violence, he literally jumped in the deep end and became a nightclub bouncer. And upon doing that, he was involved in lots of violence himself. I'm currently reading his autobiography, which is sensational. And yeah, he had to go on a journey of self-discovery and forgiveness. And ultimately now he's mellowed into one of the most fascinating, intelligent, and humble people you could meet. I've met people who've met him, I've spoken to people who've spoken to him, and everyone says the same thing. I couldn't believe how generous he was with his time and how compassionate he was, despite what happened. The story that he recounts at the end is 30 years after the incident where he was sexually abused, he bumped into the man in a cafe, and he said that he was literally transformed back to that moment where he was being abused. And he thought, right, I need to forgive him. And he forgave him. He tells the story. And yeah, it was particularly harrowing to listen to. That was the first London Reel. The second was a chap called Philip McKernan, who is the author and founder of One Last Talk, where he will get people onto a stage and say, if this is your one last talk, your one talk before you leave the earth, what would you say? And that really gets people thinking. I think, I've not got one last talk. He says, bullshit. Everyone has a story. Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear on this podcast. You can do it. You can do it, and please tell your talk. And he gets it out there in such a way that when I'm listening for this half hour I've got with him, I'm thinking, this guy's fascinating. He talks about how we put people on pedestals, for example, rock stars, footballers, movie actors, and we think they're this sort of superhuman, that they've got something that we ordinary folk don't have. And he cuts through every single myth and says that actually damages them more than you think, putting them on a pedestal. And it was a real reality check for me. He also mentioned that how often do you stay alone with your thoughts, or you spend time with yourself? So whenever somebody hears, oh, I spent time with myself last night, I watched the football game, or I listened to the radio, he says, no. When have you ever taken the time to be with yourself? So no external distraction, no radio, no signal, no phone, no TV, no book, you think. And it's quite a scary thought to literally just be there with your thoughts alone. It's a very, very weird experience. And whenever I've tried it, I thought, wow, it's actually extremely difficult. And that's why so many people have struggled throughout this quarantine period. So that's the general consensus of Philip McKernan. Another one is High Performance Podcast. It is a podcast called High Performance because it looks to explore high performance in people from business, sport, and beyond, and uncover the secrets. Now, the important thing to notice from the outset, there is no secret. Almost anybody, when they apply the right lessons and the right attitude to their field, can be a high performer if they do their best. And one of the co-hosts is a man called Professor Damien Hughes. Now, he's worked with various sports teams over the years. He's written books on huge sporting icons such as Sir Alex Ferguson. He's looked into the culture of FC Barcelona, and their period of success from 2006 to 2012 is often regarded as one of the most successful in football history. So he knows what he's talking about, and he's been around a long time. And I got to interview him both about his work he does before the podcast and during the podcast. And that was slightly surreal because I listened to his podcast religiously on a weekly basis. and he'll be interviewing some people that I personally really admired, such as Gareth Southgate, Rio Ferdinand, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Chris Hoy, Tim Peake, Michelle Mon, Johnny Wilkinson. The list goes on. And then I'm speaking to him and getting to ask him the same questions, or the questions that I've devised that I'm curious about. And that was a moment which was not surreal. I think that's probably a bit too much of an exaggeration, but certainly fulfilling. And a final one that really sticks out is the first figure that I had in the public domain who came to the podcast. Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's ex-director of communications and strategy. So he spent 10 years, he spent 10 years working for Blair, but 6 years at the heart of Downing Street. Now, this is one of the most pressurized jobs you can have. Every move is scrutinized. He meets the media daily. He's in charge of domestic and foreign policy. He's in a very tough, pressurized situation. And yet, previously, he'd had a huge mental breakdown. And surely, having gone through that, you would think he's not really equipped to do the job he did, but he still went through. And I think what is fascinating, both how he had the resilience to do such a thing, also how he had the support of the Prime Minister and the people around him, and also how somebody in that field, as described by the Mail, or the media as an alpha male, can still share that vulnerability and yet still be successful. This is someone who, for years, about 2 years, I'd read all his books, watched a lot of his interviews, and thought, yeah, there's something quite fascinating about this character. So to have him as my first high-profile guest was also quite, I don't want to say the word surreal, but quite fulfilling, certainly. So those are the ones that stick out. It's great when, going back to what I mentioned about Philip McKernan, you see people that you listen to on podcasts, or you watch on interviews, or you watch on TV, and you think, oh, they're incredible, they've got something that I don't. And then you spend time with them over the camera like I do now and think, they are great people and they have achieved great things, but they're not surreal, they're not superhuman. That's just a caricature that I've made in my mind. So it helps me realize I could definitely achieve a lot more than I'm capable of. That's probably the main lesson that I've learned from these guests is you can achieve, I don't want to say anything, because it sounds slightly cliche, and there is work involved, and you are going to face setbacks on any journey, but you can certainly achieve a lot more than you initially think you can. So those are the podcast guests that particularly resonate in my mind, both in terms of the influence they had on me prior to coming on and the messages they left with me during the interview.
Well, Conor, those are really fascinating stories, and you've got some celebrity guests to be on your podcast. I was just wondering, do you have any other, dream guests that you want to be on your podcast?
Yes, I do, and it's a long, long list. Where do I begin? There are some that are springing to mind. I think one that's coming to me straight away is a chap called Paul McKenna, who is a British hypnotherapist, has changed millions of people's lives around the world in a very simple format, where it was around late 2018, early 2019, I discovered him. And the book in the library said, Change Your Life in 7 Days. Now, I looked at that and thought, that's bullshit. I thought, I might as well try it. So I read it and thought, wow, okay, there's something to this. He'd write a set of techniques and he'd challenge me to think in a different way than I already had. I thought, this is actually fascinating. This can happen. And he was the first person out of many external celebrity influencers that made me realize life can actually get better. Up until that point, I was still very skeptical, and I thought ultimately life would be a hard slog, and in the end of it, I'd go, oh, that was okay. Whilst now I think completely differently. I think it's something to savor and enjoy. So Paul McKenna would be one. The boxer Tyson Fury, he would be high up on the list. I think what he did is extraordinary, not talked about enough, where in 2017, he's 400 pounds, he's drinking excessively, he's suicidal. And 3 years later, he wins the World Heavyweight Championship of the world, which is an astonishing achievement. And I think it's the most impressive sporting comeback of all time. I think if you'd have said back in 2017, this is what Fury's going to do against one of the most brutal opponents in history, Deontay Wilder, people would have thought, no, you're daft, that just can't happen. Yet he did it. So Paul McKenna, Tyson Fury. As a Manchester United fan, I'd love to get in the mind of Sir Alex Ferguson. I think he is the most influential, motivating figure that's been in the Premier League since its foundations. The way that he used both his incredible ability and knowledge of football and knowledge of tactics, and also his man management side, where he knew how to motivate everyone in a large squad of 30 people, all with egos, all with agents, all with ambitions, and to keep them all on side and have the success he had over 26 years is a ridiculous achievement, put into comparison with how badly Manchester United struggled since, that means he would definitely be one of the most fascinating people to interview. So the top three, as we currently speak, and there are so many more, these are just the three that, based on my own personal experience, stand out, would be Paul McKenna, Tyson Fury, and Sir Alex Ferguson. So hopefully one of them watches this and thinks, yeah, I want to come on comeback. Let's hope.
Yeah. Well, Conor, I look forward to the day that you get to interview those people on Comeback, and hopefully I get to listen to those episodes on Comeback, where there's certainly really fascinating personalities that you could have on your podcast. Now, Conor, let's go back to your teaching work. You've been teaching in Vietnam for quite some time now, so are there any misconceptions that you've learned about teaching English? And if you could just sort of address those misconceptions.
Yeah, sure. In terms of misconceptions, I think probably that you don't have to have a imposter syndrome or inferiority complex, where you don't have to be, a super teacher. So I was on my flight here with Watch Dead Poet Society. I was thinking, I'm going to change the lives of so many children, but you put unnecessary pressure on yourself. I think finding out your style is okay, where, for example, if you've never taught before, learn what works for you. If this discipline system works, great. If this one doesn't, fine. I think the misconceptions are probably that you need to be a born teacher or a real willing to make a difference. I think that if you have a degree of passion, a degree of knowledge, and you want to learn more about your students and about yourself, you can definitely do this. I think there's too much emphasis maybe on qualifications. I think often misconception is if you have a load of qualifications, you'll be great in a classroom. When I'd say it's very different, I think what the message I'm trying to put across is the biggest misconception. You don't need to be a super qualified, elite level teacher to make it. I think you need to just have the ability to work hard and learn, and you can definitely do this job. I think so many people probably out there thinking, oh no, I could never teach. I wouldn't have the patience. I wouldn't have the concentration. I wouldn't have the confidence, whatever the excuse is. I think a lot of people could do this job, and a lot of people, if they had some self-belief, could go quite far. So I think the biggest misconception, to wrap this up, is ultimately you don't have to be the most qualified, you just have to be the most willing to learn.
And I'd like to follow up that question, Conor. Now, a lot of people who would be watching this are young people who are just trying to figure out what they want to do in life, and they might be inspired of what you're doing right now, which is, creating content and teaching English in a foreign country. So, do you have any tips for those who want to follow your footsteps?
Yeah, sure. I think what I would say is two things. One, do something. Now, you might have absolutely no idea what to do, and with the variety of choices out there, picking the right one might be tricky. But I would suggest maybe one day just looking at them all and just choosing. So, for example, if you have 7 or 8 jobs in front of you that all look great, just go, almost play like a game, be like, cool, I'll choose Vietnam. So that's almost what I did, where I didn't have a specific country in mind. It's just whichever popped up first that looked appealing, I'll go for. So that's why Vietnam came up. And another thing, and I don't mean this in a morbid way whatsoever, but stay in touch with your mortality. For example, if this was your last week or your last month, what would you do? That might help you and realize what you really want to do. For example, if you're there and you think, oh, well, I don't know, but I really love cooking. You think, well, maybe you could get involved in something to do with cooking. Or, oh, well, I'm not sure, but I do like writing. Okay, maybe journalism, maybe copywriting, maybe something else. You could experience that. So I think the main 2 things were take some form of action, because it always leads to another form and another form. Speak to people who you admire or you've seen on the internet or around you that have done similar to you, and not use them as a mentor, but use them as a guide or some inspiration to see what you want to do. And the third one, keep in touch with your mortality. Realize that ultimately one day you are going to get to that final hour where you think, oh, what I wish I'd have done that. I wish, and you don't want to be saying I wish. You want to be saying I did. So, bear that in mind. You're not going to be here forever, and think about how that might influence and impact your decisions moving forward.
Absolutely, and it's that morbid to kind of put your mortality into context. We all gonna die, and it's like you said, it's better that you cherish. Well, we're not gonna live forever, so you might as well enjoy doing, find some things that you enjoy doing, and. In fact, actually, I have a bucket list. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I do really have a bucket list that things that I want to do before before I leave this world. But those are brilliant advice, Connor. Now, you're a content creator, you're a teacher, and you're also a bit of a traveler. So, what's the most important thing you want people to know about the work that you do? What's the big message from Conor Kelly?
The big lesson from Conor and comeback would to be the comeback beats the setback. Following the breakdown comes the breakthrough. Where if you often hit the rock bottom moment, you think, A, you're never going to come back from this ever again. And you think everything's over. You can't see a way forward. I've been at that point 2 or 3 times in my life so far, in coming up to 24 years. And I think the main takeaway was to be is that you can come back from whatever challenge you face. Just because it's hit you doesn't mean it's always going to hurt you. And also, you are a lot more capable than you believe, where when taking on a new project, for example, it's very easy to look at what you can't do. Well, I'll use an example of me in the podcast. I'm naturally quite a shy person. It takes me a while to want people to get comfortable and build rapport. And I'm also, we actually joke about it in family and friends that I'm not the most chatty, where small talk I'm not great at. So if you look at that and you probably think, no, you can't start a podcast, you can't get people on. So many factors why. And I thought, well, actually, no, there's a lot of other factors about me that could work for this. For example, I'm a better listener than talker. Great. The guest can talk and I listen. I'm not the most extroverted, which means I'm not going to take over the guest. And I can still build rapport because you know that I am serious in what I do. So I think the main takeaways to be that I'd like to put across to people are just because something has hit you and you faced a setback, it doesn't define you. You can make the comeback. If you have a breakdown, which is the rock bottom moment, that's often where the breakthrough comes because you don't have anything to lose then. If you're already at your rock bottom, and you have nothing else to lose, and you're at the worst point, you might as well just start doing something better because it's naturally going to elevate you. And the third point is you're a lot more capable than you think. I know that might sound slightly cheesy, but you really are. I think there are so many times when I look back at my life, I'm sure you have as well, Dennis, I'm sure people who listen to this also have, where you thought there's no chance I'd be able to do that. And yet you did. There's just something in you that I think we as humans have an innate capacity for resilience, which we don't realize until we're tested. And so, yeah, the main takeaway would be know your strengths. They can really help you. And don't underestimate yourself. You're capable of a lot more than you believe.
Absolutely. And Connor, who inspires you both professionally and personally?
Oh, this is a good one. Professionally and personally. Professionally, I'd probably go back to the people I've mentioned, who I have as dream podcast guests, but there are so many. There really are so many in the public domain. Obviously, I don't know them personally, and I don't put them on pedestals anymore since I had that interview. But I definitely have taken some inspiration from them and thought, okay, well, if you've achieved that despite the setback, then I can. There's no difference between me and you. In terms of my personal life, there are quite a lot of people, to be honest with you. I've always had very supportive family network, which has always really impressed me, where family dynamics are very, touch wood, very lucky, very loving, very caring. I had a lot of great friends over the years. Met a lot of people here in Vietnam who inspired me, people who I've interviewed and people beyond who, some people, for example, wouldn't like their story vocalized in public, and that's completely fine. But the private conversations I've had, you've come back from some real adversity and still made it. So I have friends back in the UK, I have family members in the UK, I have friends abroad who've all definitely taught me a lot. And I'm very lucky to have a good supportive network that wherever I go in the world, I will be supported, I will be loved, and ultimately everything will be okay. I am well aware of that, and I am well aware of how lucky I am to have that platform too, because not everybody does. So I'm very fortunate that I have lots of inspiring and interesting people around me.
And what's your professional dream, or do you even have a professional dream?
To be honest with you, not really. Not really. There isn't a goal for comeback. There isn't a destination that I'd really go for. I think, to be honest with you, I'm enjoying every minute of the project. And I mean that where if nobody listened and it was just me talking to my friends, I would still do it. I just love it so much. And I've noticed it grow very, very gradually over time. So I think I probably want it to develop even more. I mean, if I have to answer the question, not skirt around, I'd say the professional dream would be for me to be able to interview anybody I like. Not whenever I like. Yeah. Okay, actually, yeah, let's say that. Interview anybody I like almost whenever I like. So have access to as many minds on the planet as possible, whether this be in podcast form, blog form. I think that would be fascinating. So that's probably where I would go with the professional dream for now. This might change in the future, but based on today's answer, that's what I'll go for.
Okay. And Conor, what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a teacher?
I probably would be a journalist. Yeah, I think I'd really try and delve into the journalism route. That's something that I'm thinking about for the future anyway. I'm not entirely sure which route, but yeah, I think I'd go for journalism, or I'd probably get involved in some sort of charity work. I was up until this lockdown looking at getting involved in, some local charities around Ho Chi Minh. So yeah, I think either journalism primarily, or if not, charity work. I'm sure there'll be other jobs that are going to pop up in the future that I wouldn't have thought of. But for right now, yeah, journalist or charity worker.
Okay. And what's your distressing outlet? I know you're very busy, so how do you spend your time when you're not podcasting or teaching English?
When I'm not podcasting or teaching, I have a mix of things that I like to do. I mean, I like reading and writing, which are very introverted, but I'm quite an avid reader where I can read pretty quickly nowadays. I've learned the skill over time, so I try and read as much as possible. I also try to write as much as possible. I love spending time with friends, and this doesn't necessarily have to be going out clubbing or anything. I do like that. I do love a party, but sometimes it's nice to just have a coffee or a meal with some friends. I do like that downtime where I can relax and just goof about. I do like exercise. I've been running quite a lot in the last few weeks, and that's really benefited me. They're probably the main things I do, moving about. One of the things I need to do in the future, I've realized, is get more hobbies. So I do like, the traveling aspect too. I like going away and going on a hike, for example. That's something that really helps me. So maybe doing more of that would make me more well-rounded. But yeah, for now, reading, writing, running, catching up with friends, going for hikes, they're probably the main things that I do in my downtime when I'm not podcasting or teaching.
And finally, Conor, what else is in the pipeline if people wanted to reach out to you? What platforms can they get in touch with you at?
Well, I'm currently designing my website, which I believe will be www.thecomebatwithck.com. So this is provisional, hopefully in the next couple of days. This has inspired me now to just do it. That'll be how to reach me. I'm also on all streaming platforms with Comeback. So it's Comeback. Often to find it, there's probably more called Comeback. So if you type in Comeback Conor Kelly, Conor, that's how you'll find it. I'm also active on Instagram at the Comeback with CK. So they're the main tools that I use to promote myself.
Well, I'm Conor Kelly. It's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, but unfortunately, our time is up. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much for inviting me on today. I really appreciate it. And it's nice to be on this side of the fence rather than the other. I'm used to asking rather than answering, so it's nice to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.